I never thought my life would turn quiet in this way, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the kind that feels heavy in your chest, like something is missing and you do not know how to name it. I am a mother. I say that first because it is the only title that ever truly mattered to me. For most of my life, I did not think about myself. I thought about my husband. I thought about my son. I thought about keeping the house warm, keeping food on the table, keeping small problems from becoming big ones. That was my life, simple, predictable, and for a long time it was enough. My husband used to say that I carried the home on my back without ever complaining. I would smile when he said that, but I did not feel strong. I just felt responsible. Responsibility becomes a habit after many years. You stop asking whether it is heavy. You just keep carrying it. When my husband was alive, the house felt full even when it was quiet. His presence was calm, steady, like a light left on in another room. You may not see it, but you know it is there. He was not a loud man. He did not talk much about feelings, but he watched everything. Sometimes when I worried about money or the future, he would say, "Do not worry. Things will be taken care of." I believed him. I always believed him. Our son was the center of our world. We raised him with care, discipline, and love. We taught him respect. At least we thought we did. I stayed up nights when he was sick. I saved little coins in a jar for his school needs. I gave him the better food when we had less. That is what mothers do. They give first and ask nothing back. When my husband passed away, something inside me became very still. Grief did not arrive loudly. It arrived like fog, slowly, quietly, and once it settled, everything felt distant. After his death, my son became my whole world. I depended on him emotionally, not because I wanted to, but because there was no one else. When he married, I was happy for him, truly happy. I prayed for his marriage to be full of love and peace. I welcomed my daughter-in-law into the house with a hopeful heart. I tried to give her space. I tried not to interfere. I reminded myself again and again, this is their time. I already lived mine. At first, things were fine. We spoke politely. We shared meals. We smiled at each other. But politeness is not warmth, and smiles can hide distance. Slowly, I began to feel like a guest in my own home, not unwanted at first, just unnecessary. My daughter-in-law did not shout. She did not insult me openly. Her words were soft, but softness can still cut. She would rearrange the kitchen after I cooked. She would redo chores I had already finished. She would make decisions without asking me. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Different generation, different habits. But then she began to speak through my son instead of to me. He says it is better if you rest. He says you should not worry about this. He says you should stay in your room more. I listened, I nodded, I stepped back. Every step back made me smaller. My son slowly changed too, not suddenly, not harshly. He became distant in a quiet way. He stopped asking my opinion. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. His eyes were always tired, always somewhere else. Sometimes I would look at him and try to find the little boy I raised, the one who used to hold my hand tightly when crossing the road, the one who used to run to me after school. That boy felt far away. At night, I would lie in bed and listen to the house, the sounds of doors opening and closing, the quiet laughter from another room. I felt like a shadow moving through someone else's life. One evening, while passing the hallway, I overheard a conversation. I was not trying to listen, but when your name is spoken, your ears do not give you a choice. She depends on us for everything, my daughter-in-law said. Her voice was calm, almost practical. My son did not reply right away. She is getting old, she continued. It is hard to manage. There was a pause. Then my son said something I could not fully hear. That silence hurt more than her words. I stood there, frozen, holding my breath. My heart felt like it had dropped somewhere deep inside me. That night, I did not sleep. I replayed every moment of my life, every sacrifice, every quiet decision I made for my family. I asked myself a question I never asked before. When did I become a burden? Days passed, then weeks. The distance grew heavier. Conversations became shorter. Meals became silent. Then one day, my daughter-in-law stood in front of me. Her hands were folded. Her voice was steady. "I think it would be better if you found another place to stay," she said. The words did not hit me right away. They floated in the air for a moment, like they were unsure where to land. I looked at my son. He did not meet my eyes. In that moment, I felt something break inside me. Not loudly, not violently, just a soft crack. I smiled. I do not know why. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was shock. I said nothing. I went to my room and packed a small bag. I folded my clothes slowly, carefully, as if moving too fast might make it real. When I stood at the door, no one stopped me. No one said, "Stay." No one said, "We will fix this." I stepped outside. The air felt colder than before. I did not know where I was going. I only knew I was no longer welcome where I once belonged. And as I walked away from that house, I felt something deeper than sadness. I felt forgotten. I did not look back when I left that house, not because I was strong, but because I was afraid. Afraid that if I turned around, my legs would stop working. Afraid that I would beg, and I did not want my last memory to be one of begging. I walked slowly, carrying a small bag that felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the clothes inside it, but because of what I was leaving behind: years, memories, a life that once felt secure. The road felt unfamiliar, even though I had walked it many times before. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. When your heart changes, the world changes with it. I found a small room to stay in for a few nights. It was not much, just a bed, a chair, and a small window. But it was quiet. That first night, I sat on the bed and listened to my own breathing. I realized something then. I had not been alone like this in many years. Loneliness is strange. It does not scream. It whispers. It asks you questions when you are tired, questions you do not want to answer. Was I a good mother? Did I ask for too much? Did I stay too long? I tried to sleep, but my mind kept returning to my son's face. The way he avoided my eyes, the way he said nothing. I wondered if he felt relief after I left. That thought hurt more than anything else. The next morning, I woke up early out of habit. There was no kitchen to clean, no breakfast to prepare for anyone else. I sat by the window and watched people pass by. Each one of them had somewhere to go, someone waiting for them. I felt like I was standing outside of life, watching it move on without me. I did not call my son, not because I did not want to hear his voice, but because I was afraid of what I might hear, or worse, what I might not hear. Days passed slowly. Time moved differently when there was nothing to fill it. I ate simple food. I kept my belongings neat. I spoke to no one unless necessary. In the quiet, memories came back to me, small moments, moments I never thought I would miss so deeply. My son as a child, sleeping with his hand curled around my finger. My husband sitting at the table counting papers quietly, family meals where everyone talked at once. I realized something painful. Those moments were alive only in me now. One afternoon, while sorting through my bag, I found my husband's old wallet. I had carried it without thinking. Inside it was his bank card. I stared at it for a long time. He had once placed it in my hand and said, "Keep this safe. You may need it one day." At the time, I laughed. I told him I did not understand such things. He smiled and said nothing. I had never used that card, not once. I did not even know if it still worked. But that day, hunger and fear pressed against me quietly. I realized I could not continue like this. Not forever. I needed to know what my husband had meant. I needed to understand. The bank was not far. I walked there slowly, holding the card tightly, as if it might disappear. Inside, the air felt cold, clean, orderly. I waited my turn, my heart beating faster than it should have. When the manager took the card, I noticed his expression change. At first, he looked confused. Then surprised, then very still. He checked the screen again, then again. "Please sit," he said softly. I felt a sudden fear rise in my chest. I thought maybe something was wrong. Maybe I was not supposed to be there. He asked me questions about my husband, about my name. Then he said words that did not make sense to me. He spoke of accounts, of investments, of a number so large my mind could not hold it. 33 million. The room felt like it was spinning, even though nothing moved. I did not feel happy. I did not feel excited. I felt empty. My husband had protected me in ways I never understood. He had planned for a future where I would stand alone. And now I was standing alone. The manager spoke kindly. He explained everything slowly. He told me the money was legally mine. I nodded, but my heart was elsewhere. I thought of my son, of the house I left, of the way respect had disappeared so quickly. Money cannot replace love. It cannot fix broken silence. I left the bank with papers in my hand and heaviness in my chest. That night, I returned to my small room. I sat on the bed and held the wallet again. My husband's quiet voice echoed in my memory. Things will be taken care of. Yes, things were taken care of. But at what cost? Days later, my son called me. His voice was different, softer, uncertain. He said he wanted to see me. When he arrived, he looked smaller somehow, less confident. He apologized. He cried. He spoke of pressure, of confusion, of mistakes. I listened quietly, but something inside me had changed. I forgave him, because mothers forgive, but forgiveness does not erase pain. It only teaches you how to live with it. He asked me to come back. I looked at him and felt tears rise, not of anger, not of joy, of understanding. I realized that I could not return to a place where I had learned how easily I could be sent away. I told him I needed time. He nodded. As he left, I felt a deep sadness settle over me, not because I was alone, but because I finally understood something very hard. Love that depends on convenience is fragile, and once it breaks, it never sounds the same again. I stayed in my small home. I lived quietly, simply. The money sat untouched for a long time, not because I did not need it, but because it reminded me of everything I had lost. Sometimes, late at night, I would whisper into the silence, I did my best. And I hoped that somewhere, my husband could hear me. After my son left that evening, the room felt larger than before. Not because it had changed, but because something inside me had moved away from everything familiar. I sat alone for a long time. I did not cry right away. I have learned that tears often come late, after the heart has already said what it needed to say. I kept thinking about his face, the way his eyes filled with regret, the way his hands trembled when he spoke. I believed he was sorry. I truly did. But sorrow does not always arrive in time to undo damage. Sometimes it only arrives to explain it. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds outside my window. Cars passing, footsteps fading, life continuing. I realized something painful then. The world does not stop when your heart breaks. It simply keeps going, and you are expected to follow. In the days that followed, my son called often. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he stayed quiet on the line. I could hear his guilt breathing between us. He asked how I was. I told him I was fine. That word has many meanings. He asked if I needed anything. I said no, not because I did not need, but because I no longer knew how to ask. As a mother, you get used to giving. You forget how to receive without feeling weak. I moved into a small, modest apartment soon after. Nothing special. Clean walls, plain furniture. I chose it because it felt honest. It matched how I felt inside. I did not tell my son where I lived at first. I needed a place that belonged only to me. A space where I did not feel like a burden or a guest. At night, I cooked small meals for myself. Rice, soup, simple food that warmed without demanding effort. Sometimes I would set 2 plates by mistake. My hands remembered what my heart tried to forget. I would stand there, holding a spoon, staring at the empty space across from me. Then I would quietly put 1 plate away. Those moments hurt the most. Not the big memories, the small habits. I began sorting through old things one afternoon. Letters, photos, papers my husband had kept neatly organized. He was always careful like that, as if he knew one day I would need order when my life felt scattered. I found a notebook of his. Inside, there were dates, numbers, short notes. Nothing emotional, nothing personal. But at the back of the notebook, there was 1 sentence written in his handwriting, "For her when I am gone." And my chest tightened. He had thought of me even when planning for a future he would not see, and yet I had ended up alone anyway. That realization was heavy. Money can prepare for comfort, but it cannot prepare for loneliness. As weeks passed, my son visited more often, sometimes alone, sometimes with his wife. She was quieter now, more careful with her words. She apologized once, briefly, politely. I accepted it. But apologies do not rebuild trust the way people think they do. They simply acknowledge the ruins. I noticed something during those visits. They looked at me differently. There was respect now, attention, concern, and that hurt more than disrespect ever did, because it meant I was valued only after they learned what I had. Not for who I was, not for what I had given, but for what I owned. I never spoke this thought out loud, but it sat with me quietly, like an ache that never leaves. One evening, after they left, I sat alone and whispered, "If I had nothing, would you still come?" The silence answered me. My health began to change slowly, not in dramatic ways, just small signs. I felt tired more often. My chest felt tight at night. My hands shook sometimes when I held a cup. Doctors said it was stress. Age, grief, they told me to rest. Rest is easy advice to give. It is harder to do when your mind has nowhere to rest. I began walking in the mornings, slow walks, careful steps. I watched families pass by. Children holding their parents' hands, couples walking side by side. I did not feel jealous, just distant, like I was watching a life I once belonged to. Sometimes, strangers would smile at me, small, kind gestures. Those smiles reminded me that kindness still existed, even if it no longer lived where I expected it to. One night, I dreamed of my husband. He was standing in our old kitchen, the one filled with light in the afternoons. He looked at me the way he always did, calm, steady. "You did well," he said. I woke up crying because I needed to hear that more than anything else. The money remained mostly untouched. I donated some quietly. I helped where I could without being seen. I did not want gratitude. I wanted purpose. My son once asked why I lived so simply when I could have more. I told him something I had never said before. I lost my place once. I said, "I do not want to lose myself too." He did not understand, not fully, and that was okay. Some lessons are not meant to be shared. They are meant to be carried. As time passed, I noticed a distance growing again. Not out of conflict, out of life. They had their world, I had mine, and slowly visits became less frequent. Calls became shorter. The same quiet that once followed my husband's death returned, but this time it felt colder. I realized then that reconciliation does not always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means acceptance. Acceptance that some bonds change shape. Acceptance that love can exist with distance. One evening, sitting alone, I asked myself a hard question. If I had stayed, would I have disappeared completely? The answer came softly, yes. I had left to protect what little dignity I had left, and though it cost me closeness, it saved me from something worse. Still, the sadness remained, not sharp, not loud, just constant, like a low note playing beneath everything. I learned to live with it, to breathe around it, to wake up each day and continue anyway, because life does not wait for your heart to heal. It simply asks you to keep going, and so I did, quietly, carefully, alone. Time does not change suddenly. It changes in small ways that you hardly notice until one day you realize you are not the same person you were before. My days became quiet in a way that felt permanent, not lonely in a dramatic sense, just steady, silent, and predictable. I woke up early every morning, even when there was no reason to. Old habits do not leave easily. They sit beside you, reminding you of who you used to be. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the sky change color. Morning light is gentle. It does not ask questions. It does not expect anything from you. That is why I liked it. I spoke to fewer people as time passed, not because I disliked company, but because conversations began to feel tiring. Explaining how you feel takes energy, and most people do not really want the answer anyway. They ask, "How are you?" And they expect, "I'm fine." So that is what I gave them. My son still called, but less often now. When he did, his voice sounded busy. Life had pulled him forward, and I had learned not to pull back. I did not blame him. Children grow into their own lives. That is natural. But knowing something is natural does not make it painless. Sometimes, after hanging up the phone, I would sit quietly and wonder if he noticed how quiet I had become. Not just in my voice, but in my existence. I stopped telling stories from the past, stopped sharing memories. There was no place for them anymore. I realized something then. When no one asks about your past, it slowly stops feeling real. My health continued to change in quiet ways. Nothing urgent, nothing dramatic, just a tiredness that sleep did not fix, a heaviness in my chest that came and went, a shortness of breath when climbing stairs. Doctors gave me words and suggestions, but words cannot explain a heart that has grown tired of holding things alone. I followed their advice. I rested more. I walked less. My world became smaller. At night, silence pressed against me. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every thought. I found myself speaking out loud sometimes, not because I expected an answer, but because hearing my own voice reminded me I was still here. I spoke to my husband often, not in prayer, just in conversation. I told him about my days, about my son, about how life had changed. I never asked him why things turned out this way. I knew there was no answer that could comfort me. One evening, while sitting alone, I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest. It was brief, it passed quickly. I told myself it was nothing. I had learned not to make a fuss. That night, I dreamed again. But this time, the dream was quiet. I was sitting at a table. No one else was there. The room was familiar, but empty. I woke up with tears on my face. The days that followed felt heavier, not sad, just slower. I moved through them carefully, like someone walking on thin ice. My son visited once after many weeks. He brought food. He asked questions. He noticed how thin I had become, how slow my movements were. "You should let me help more," he said. I smiled. "I am fine," I replied. The words tasted empty. He stayed for a short time, then he left. After the door closed, the quiet returned. I did not cry. Crying requires energy too. I began writing letters, not to send, just to write. Letters to my son, letters to my husband, letters to myself. In those letters, I said the things I never said out loud, that I was tired, that I missed being needed, that I felt invisible. Writing made the pain softer, like pressing on a bruise slowly instead of suddenly. One afternoon, while organizing papers, I paused. I felt dizzy. I sat down and waited for it to pass. It did. I did not tell anyone. There are moments when you realize you are becoming fragile, not weak, just breakable. And when you reach that point, you begin to prepare quietly. I arranged my belongings, sorted documents, labeled envelopes, not because I expected something to happen, but because I wanted order. Order gives comfort when control is gone. I began giving away small things, books, clothes, objects that held memories. Each item felt like a goodbye. I told myself I was just simplifying, but deep inside I knew. One night, as I lay in bed, my breathing felt different, not painful, just shallow. I placed my hand on my chest and listened. I thought of my son, not with anger, not with regret, just love. Love does not disappear, even when everything else changes. I wondered if he would remember my voice. The way I used to hum while cooking, the way I said his name. These thoughts did not scare me. They made me tired. The next morning, I woke up late. The sunlight was already strong. I felt weak. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before standing. My phone was silent. No messages, no calls. That was okay. I made tea and sat by the window. I watched the world move, people walking, cars passing, life continuing. I felt very small, but strangely calm. For the first time in a long while, I did not feel like I needed to explain myself to anyone. I had lived, I had loved, I had given, and maybe that was enough. As the day moved forward, my chest felt tight again. This time, it did not pass as quickly. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. I thought of my husband's voice, soft, steady. "You did well," he said again, somewhere in my memory. I held onto that. Because sometimes that is all you have. That day felt no different when it began. That is how endings usually arrive. They do not announce themselves. They come quietly like any other day and wait for you to notice. I sat by the window longer than usual. The tea beside me had gone cold, but I did not mind. Cold tea still has warmth in its memory. My body felt tired in a way I had never felt before. not the tiredness that comes from work or worry, but the kind that feels final, as if something inside you is slowly letting go. I stood up carefully, holding the edge of the table for balance. For a moment, the room felt far away, then it came back. I told myself to move slowly. There was no hurry anymore. I thought about calling my son, just to hear his voice, not to tell him anything important, just to say hello. But something stopped me, not pride, not anger, just a feeling that some words are better left unsaid. Some calls are meant to remain unanswered, not because they are unimportant, but because they come too late. I went back to my chair and sat down. I placed my hands in my lap and closed my eyes. My breathing felt shallow again. This time it did not frighten me. Fear needs energy too, and I felt empty of it. I thought of my life, not in scenes, but in feelings. Warmth, effort, waiting. I remembered my mother's hands when I was a child, rough from work, gentle on my face. I remembered the first time I held my son, how small he felt, how sure I was that I would protect him from everything. I remembered my husband's quiet smile, the way he stood behind me when I washed dishes, the way he never spoke much, but always listened. I wondered if he was waiting somewhere, not in a place exactly, just in a sense of peace. The pain in my chest grew stronger, then softer, like a wave that rises and falls. I leaned back and let it pass through me. I realized then that I was not afraid of dying. I was afraid of being forgotten. But even that fear faded, because forgetting is not always cruelty. Sometimes it is simply life moving forward. I felt my thoughts slowing down. Each one arrived with effort, then drifted away. I thought of my son one last time. Not as the man who stood silent when I was sent away, but as the boy who once ran into my arms. That is how I chose to remember him. My breathing became uneven. I placed one hand on my chest, not to stop anything, but to feel it. I whispered softly. I did my best. The room was quiet. There was no dramatic moment, no sudden collapse, just a gradual fading, like a light turned down slowly. I do not know how long I sat there. Time had stopped meaning anything. At some point, the pain was gone. So was the tiredness. There was only stillness. I do not know how they found me. I was no longer there to see it, but I imagine it was quiet. A knock at the door, no answer. Concern, then realization. I imagine my son standing in that doorway, looking at the chair by the window, the cold cup of tea. I imagine him calling my name once, then again. I imagine the silence answering him. I wonder if he noticed how small the room was, how little space I took up in the end. I wonder if he felt guilt, or regret, or simply shock. I hope he did not blame himself too harshly. Life is heavy enough without carrying blame forever. I hope he remembered something good, a meal I cooked, a story I told, a time I stayed up all night for him, because those things were real, they mattered. I hope he understood finally that love is not always loud, that sacrifice is often invisible, that mothers disappear quietly long before they are gone. I left letters behind, not accusations, not explanations, just words of love, words that said, I forgive you, words that said, live well, words that said, I was proud of you. Because anger has no place at the end, only truth does. If I could speak now, I would say this. Do not wait until silence becomes permanent. Do not assume love will always be there tomorrow. Do not confuse patience with weakness. Some people leave rooms quietly, hoping someone will notice, and sometimes no one does until it is too late. I lived a simple life. I loved deeply. I endured quietly. That was my story. And if you are listening to this, if you are hearing my voice now, please remember someone who loves you softly, someone who does not ask much, someone who stays quiet even when they are hurting, because one day their voice may exist only in memory. And memory, no matter how strong, can never answer back.